The Overwhelm is Optional podcast is for you if you want to quit the struggle with overwhelm. You want to live life to the full. You don't want to compromise your health and relationships in order to have well-paid, satisfying, meaningful work. You want it all on your terms. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Overwhelm is Optional podcast, making overwhelm optional for you by considering where your overwhelm is coming from and teaching you techniques and tools which are easy to use without adding to your overwhelm. So welcome if this is your first time here. You're one of my increasing number of listeners and it's just so exciting, and thank you to all those who have contacted me with stuff you want covered or just to say how much the podcast's adding to your life. I really appreciate it and I love hearing from you, so thank you for that. So this week's, I'm finding it quite difficult to get going with this one because I think it's a really complicated, or it can be quite a complicated topic, selfishness. But I think it's essential to just dive in and give it a go because it's like the elephant in the room, right? So last week I was talking about how as gentle rebels, we need to practice putting ourselves first. So this is essential. And I introduced you to one of my favourite and most essential practices, which I call the morning promise, which is starting your day focusing on yourself. And that's great, right? But what comes up for you? It's selfish. It's selfish to put yourself first, even if you can see it's a good thing. So if we think about, there's lots of sayings and platitudes, aren't there, about self-care and about things like own oxygen mask first is a really common saying. Put your own oxygen mask on first. But there's a reason why it's a saying, and that is that in actual fact, in an emergency, we don't think clearly because the prefrontal cortex goes offline and we can't think clearly because it was not very helpful to be standing there in front of a moving truck or an angry bear going, oh, I wonder what I should do this time. No, you've just got to react, right? So the reason that there is a saying, put your own oxygen mask on first, is because it has to be stated. It's not going to just happen otherwise. And then I can hear some of you saying, oh, but for some people it would. Yes, okay, so some people it would. And that's what we need to look at. So the reason I believe that we have a block in being able to prioritize ourselves is because we don't want to be one of those people who would take all of the oxygen. We don't want to be that person. But let's be clear, most people aren't like that. Most people in an emergency help other people. Most people are kind. A lot of people are very overwhelmed and are muddling on through and mess up, but that's not the same as being psychopathic or sociopathic and, stealing everybody else's oxygen masks. We're not talking about that. Those people aren't listening to this podcast. They're not interested. They don't need this podcast. So I'm not talking to actual people who are capable of real, proper, cruel selfishness. So let's just dump that. Let's just get that out of the way. I'm not talking to those people. And even if I were talking to those people, this podcast would help them get in touch with their hearts. So actually, that's not even a problem. I'm not teaching how to be selfish. I'm not advocating, obviously, making the world a worse place to be. So let's get that out of the way and focus on you and how you can feel the resistance to putting yourself first, but then gently, as a gentle rebel, you gently allow that resistance to be your teacher. So what's coming up for me? Oh, this feels selfish. What's wrong with that? What's that telling me? And so that you can put yourself first in a way that enables you to find the instructions to your life, because that's ultimately what this gentle rebellion is. It's saying, right, so the normal ways of doing things just don't work for me, so I'm going to write my own manual. And inside Get Your Life Back, or if you do one-to-one work with me, that's what we do. You are uncovering the rules that they're innate rules to you, they're innate ways of being, and you get to decide. You write your own manual. And it's not like a big job. It's like if you're thinking, oh my God, I could never work with you, Heidi, I'd have to write my own manual. No, it's not that. It's like a page. It's a manual is the reminder of all the deep work that you do with me. It's really cool. It's really helpful. It just means that when you do kind of think, oh, I'm not as committed as I was, and I'm starting to feel a bit of overwhelm, then you just go, manual, what does my manual say to do? Oh yeah, it's just breadcrumbs. It's breadcrumbs back to that feeling of freedom and ease that people find within themselves when they work closely with me, either inside Get Your Life Back or in one-to-one coaching. So this is about moving from overusing the mind, because the mind is easily overwhelmed, and starting to connect to your body, really listening to your body so you can have health and well-being and energy and fewer injuries, things like that. And then also connecting to the heart, because the heart is where we feel that joy, that love, that ease, all the stuff that we're really striving for. And then learning to control the attention. So instead of trying to control the mind, we control the attention. So you can notice the thoughts that are saying, oh no, I can't put myself first today. I've got to do this. I can't let that person down. And then listening to your heart and your body as well. So you can just get a whole overview. But that's a whole, there's a lot in that. I'm just summarizing it for you at the moment. But today we're going to concentrate on the resistance to using the morning promise, the resistance to starting your day off by tuning into yourself. We're going to call it out, this resistance, which is, I don't want to be selfish. So I believe that the reason we don't want to commit to ourselves first because it feels selfish is because we don't like being on the end of somebody else's selfishness. So let's just start with that. If you find the world a little bit too harsh, like it's moving too quickly, it's a bit noisy, it's just like everybody else's needs, it's really hard to have space for me, then you don't want to be somebody who adds that to somebody else's life. So you don't want to make the world harsher. You want the world to be less harsh and kinder. You want to be able to be your lovely, kind self without being taken advantage of. Which means that you really don't want to be selfish. Is this starting to ring? I hope this is resonating. So let's just think about what we mean by selfishness. So I've already discounted the real nasty selfishness. So there are people who go through life and they do horrible, horrible things. And I'm not talking to them, and you're not one of them. So we can discount that overt selfishness. And let's talk about the kind of selfishness that you're frightened of maybe slipping into. Let's think about that way. So I've got three examples that I'm going to explore. I'm laughing at them now because one is the loo roll crisis that happened in lockdown when the media said, oh, there's no loo roll. Everybody went and bought loo roll, which created a loo roll crisis. I don't know if there was a loo roll crisis before that. I don't really care, but I'm laughing because it's quite a funny thing to use. But anyway, so I'm going to use the loo roll crisis and selfishness. I'm going to use the slopey shoulders, which is when people manage to give other people part of their job and aren't really doing their own job. And that's difficult because there's obviously jobs don't really have fixed job descriptions. So that's how it's possible. I call that slopey shoulders. It's typical on like a Friday afternoon and somebody who's above you, or if you have clients, if you have your own business and you have clients, it would be somebody who on a kind of Friday afternoon or at the end of the day starts offloading more work onto you instead of taking responsibility for it. And then the other one is missed deadlines, which is letting people down by being a bit like, oh, it's the people who go around being overwhelmed in a kind of like blaze of chaos, just in a like that's how they get through life, because it works for them. Oh, I'm so overwhelmed, and then everybody will come and help me, as opposed to you guys who are like genuinely overwhelmed but hiding it really well and holding everything together, and nobody thinks you're overwhelmed, so they give you more to do. It's difficult to talk. Can you see why I'm struggling to start this? I was struggling, not struggling, but I put a lot of extra thought into this episode, because I can see the more we talk about it, the more blurry it can be. It's like, but that's selfish, Heidi. I don't want to be that person. So I'm trying to unpick it. Bear with me. With the loo roll crisis. So I'm in England, and I can't even remember when the loo roll crisis was now. I think it might have even happened a couple of times. Anyway, so there's, and I avoid the news in the main because it filters down anyway and it's not healthy for me. But anyway, so there was a loo roll crisis at some point. I think it's probably the first lockdown. It's like, oh, there's no loo roll. So everybody went and bought loo roll. And then there was this whole backlash of, those people are so selfish. And, you know, if you're one of those people who, you know, was just getting on with their day, and then, you know, you needed loo roll and you went to the shop and it had all gone, you'd be like really hurt because, oh my God, all those people have taken the loo roll and I don't have any, and that's rubbish. And it would be easy to judge everybody else who had loo roll as being selfish, but that's a judgment. And I don't think for me, and I don't know what people are really thinking, because the media's gonna, you know, storm up a sales page of their newspapers, aren't they? But say, you know, it'd be easy, wouldn't it, when you're tired at the end of the day to think, oh my God, everybody's selfish, they haven't left me any loo roll. But let's just turn that around a bit. When we see somebody, say we saw somebody and they had like 10 packets, large packets of loo roll in their trolley, and they were paying for it, it would be really easy to like hijack them and go, oh my God, why are you buying all that loo roll? But in England, we wouldn't say that, because we just queue and we grumble under our breath about that. We don't tend to confront people. But how do you know that the person wasn't buying loo roll for every single old person in their road? Like, you have no idea. When we judge other people's selfishness, we have no idea what they're dealing with at all. So it could be argued that there was no selfishness, that actually it was a sensible thing to do. So if there's going to be a shortage of loo roll, you go and buy loo roll. Of course you do, because you're looking after yourself and your family. It's a sensible thing to do. It's not selfish. It's just an act. Everybody needs loo roll, right? So I just want to look at this perceived selfishness, because I think it's really easy to get caught up in the idea that the world is terrible and everybody's getting more and more selfish, and that families are broken down and communities are broken down. And there may or may not be truth to that. I'm not going into that on my podcast, certainly not in this episode. I'm talking about what we're talking about when we mean selfishness. And that when we judge the world as being selfish, I think that's unhelpful to us as people who want the world to be less harsh and kinder, and who find it difficult to prioritise our own needs. I don't think that's helpful. So I would challenge you to reframe any feelings about other people's perceived selfishness, and instead, I would, for myself, it's up to you what you do, I would go see if you can neutrally notice anything that you're flagging up as selfish. So I guess what I'm inviting you to do is say, what is your definition of selfishness? What is your fear of being selfish? What does it bring up? So this is great, because this is actually an opportunity for greater self-awareness and for the release of unhelpful thoughts and self-judgments around putting yourself first. And the loo roll crisis is just my way of flagging it up, because it's quite a dramatic thing, which was immediately judged by the media. I don't know if it was judged by anybody else. You know, the media, that's how it works. So what comes up for you? So you can do this two ways. You can start with the loo roll idea. So I've got pictures in my head about the people not being able to get loo roll. There were pictures, weren't there? I don't even know if I saw them. I'm quite visual, so it comes up for me. So if you've got pictures in your mind about empty shelves and people getting angry, and maybe you were inconvenienced by that, what comes up for you? And then see if you can notice it neutrally. So notice, if there's like anger and resentment, and like if there's any kind of going down that whole, oh my goodness, it's really sad that I live in a world where people behave so badly towards each other. And just notice that without judgment. So we're neutrally noticing. So get out of your head, into your body, feel your feet on the ground. Maybe allow your belly to soften for a moment if it wants to. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Maybe allowing the shoulders to move away from the ears. And just notice how you feel in this moment as you consider selfishness in the world. How does it make you feel? And then see if you can notice the behavior that you're thinking of. So I'm thinking of the loo roll crisis. And see if you can notice it neutrally instead. So instead of seeing people behaving badly and selfishly, and that you don't want that in the world, you want more kindness in the world, so that you can feel more at home in the world, and you can feel safer to be yourself and not be taken advantage of by other people who are more selfish than you, if that's how you're feeling, I don't know. Then just see if you can notice behaviour as neutral instead. And what you will see is people walking into a shop and taking loo roll off a shelf and paying for it. And that's all people are doing. And that's quite a normal thing to do because we all need loo roll, right? And you might see some people who are getting more than one packet. And just notice it neutrally. Oh, that's interesting. And then you could be curious. So curiosity trumps judgment. So at the same time as watching this behaviour, which has been labelled as selfish, notice your own feelings about the behaviour. Notice the stories in your mind about this, and notice that neutrally as well. So we're just noticing neutrally to allow curiosity and a different viewpoint, and allowing judgment to be released from what we're looking at and also from ourselves. Because if you might get stuff coming, I don't know. In my mind, I might get things like, oh my God, I'm so harsh. I was so judgy. That could be going on in your head. See if you can neutrally notice your own response to this gentle thought experiment. Just notice all of it completely neutrally. And then notice if there's so for me, there would be, I have this, my heart is kind of going, oh, I wish the world was kinder. I wish the media for a start wasn't so unhelpful and divisive and emotive in its selling, using headlines to sell things. Because I want to know about good stuff. So for me personally, it's a media thing that I find unhelpful. So I don't know. For me, something might come up like, oh, I wish the world was kinder, and I wish that this was represented so it was reflected back to us, because we get what's reflected back to us. So if we believe the world is kinder, if we believe that we can be kind to ourselves, it's safe to be kind to ourselves, because if we put ourselves first, we have more energy and we're more smiley and we're more loving and we're more fun. So we immediately send kindness and love out into the world by putting ourselves first. And it's safe to do so because it's possible to do that and not be selfish. And then maybe reframing or seeing the good in people. Oh, look at all those people who were sensible enough to go to the shop and look after their families. Look at all those people who bought loo roll for other people and went home and shared it. I don't know. Whatever comes up for you is very personal. So I'm just inviting you to consider a public act of something that was labelled as selfish, and just notice if you can notice it neutrally, and notice what comes up for you. And you can just let this thought experiment wash over you over the next few days and just see what comes up for you. So it's actually a self-awareness practice, because I'm asking you to neutrally notice it, which is my self-awareness practice. So just notice and just allow stuff to come up and keep noticing and noticing, because it's interesting and it's for you. So Is there anything coming up for you about how people reacted in the loo roll crisis that may be linked to preventing you from committing to yourself first, because you don't want to be like them, because you want the world to be kinder? That's the question. Let's go on to the next one. So the next one is the slopey shoulders. So this is when, if you work in an organisation, people above you, not people below you, that will be the missed deadlines one. So people above you, people who, or next to you, very common, isn't it, next to you. So if there's a group of people kind of in middle management or something, and they don't all work equally hard, and one of them's, or some of them are much better at offloading their job onto somebody else. Some people are just absolute artists at this. And there's all sorts of well-known manipulative ways to do this, like copying in other people into an email. So there's an email trail of evidence showing that you've done all this work, even if it hasn't achieved anything. And that sounds quite judgmental, the way it could be interpreted as being judgmental. I guess it is a little bit, because I don't like that, because it's like, I like to believe that we can trust people to see that we're doing a good job. But can we? Because in organisations, people get overwhelmed and they get lost, and it's not always possible. So I know that I wasn't very good at making it clear the work I was doing, and then I'd get frustrated because people wouldn't notice that I already was real kicking ass and had taken on a lot of other people's responsibility. But I guess I'm not maybe one of my problems then was not showing off enough. Look what I've done, and other people were better at it. So it's just the way things are. It's kind of like, I'm now thinking large organisations are a bit like families, it's like we're all these children vying for attention and wanting to be validated externally. I don't know. Anyway, put a bunch of humans together and extraordinary things happen, and we learn a lot about ourselves. Anyway, let's talk about slopey shoulders, because if you don't want to be the person who offloads onto other people because other people have offloaded onto you and you wish they didn't because you're close to burnout and you'd like your life back, then you don't want to be that person. So let's just examine that. So slopey shoulders is when somebody else either explicitly dumps some of their work onto you, or they do it very nicely in this, like, that thing where it's like, oh, I really thought you'd like the opportunity to do this. That happened to me a lot, because I was the kind of person who go, oh yeah, I really like that opportunity. It's difficult, isn't it? Because there are times when it is a genuine opportunity and it's such a joy to have that stretch. And then there's other times when actually somebody's just offloading stuff. And it's difficult. So this is actually, if we look at this as selfishness, slopey shoulders, is it selfishness, or is it a learnt behaviour of how other people get to live their life by offloading some stuff onto you? And in which case, is it a boundary issue? It's probably a bit of both, isn't it? So, in a well-run company, there should be less, for me, there would be less of that. That wouldn't be going on. It wouldn't be acceptable. It just wouldn't be acceptable. That's not okay. You don't offload your work onto somebody else so you can go home and have a better weekend. That's not okay. And it happens a lot. And that, I do think there's a lot of that, and it's toxic. So I'm calling that one out. And that's not something I want to be anything to do with. So when you're in that situation, this isn't about what to do in that situation. This is about how can we use that situation to look at toxic relationships at work so that you can examine your own resistance to putting yourself first. And that's it. So how does it make you feel when I highlight the idea of slopey shoulders? And you might be thinking, oh my God, that happens to me all the time. I hate that happens to me. And I never want to be that person. Well, first of all, you probably aren't that person. So that's okay. Drop that. And then look at, if it is happening to you, what's it telling you? I'm hoping it's telling you that you need to put yourself first. Can you see? So if it's happening to you, and some of it will be because you love the opportunity and you love helping people and you don't want to say no. So there's some boundary issues there. There's some internal worth and validation work to be done there. And that starts with, I commit to myself first, my life, my way. And that means, which is the morning promise. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, you can listen to that afterwards if you want. But for me, my life, my way means I'm not constantly taking on other people's shit. I'm not constantly taking on other people's responsibility. So while I'm happy to help, for me, it's been about learning strong boundaries for myself, and then learning to help without taking on the emotional responsibility for the outcome from somebody else. Can you see? And that does start with committing to myself first, and doing a lot of daydreaming and journaling and really like enjoying thinking about, what does my life, my way look like? So for me, that's an overall thing. So that's being healthy, having really good boundaries, enjoying my life, doing fulfilling, satisfying work and getting paid really well for it without burning out. It's like lots of things for me. What is it for you? Well, you get to decide when you refocus onto yourself. You only get to know how you want your life to work for you when you start by focusing on yourself. But I encourage you to do this gently. So it's very easy, isn't it, to think, oh my God, now I have to make these huge, sweeping, disruptive changes. No, you're a gentle rebel. As a gentle rebel, we kind of do this secretly without anybody really knowing until we're ready to share it or not. So it's private work, it's quiet work. And that's really nice, because then there's no pressure. There's no like, oh, I made a declaration to start looking after myself better and I didn't do very well, so now I feel judged. No, because if you're just doing it yourself, then the judgment is your own judgment. So drop that right away by noticing neutrally, because neutrality trumps the judgment. Right, and the last one was missed deadlines. So missed deadlines, I don't mean you missing a deadline. Like I'm not advocating never missing deadlines. So let's just clear this one up first. So by missed deadlines, I mean the people who are either under your management at work, or their deadline affects you or affects people that you manage. So it's missed deadlines that have a big impact on other people. So it's selfish to miss the deadline, because then the other people can't get on with their job or they can't finish it, and then it just backs it up. So a missed deadline can have a huge impact. And I'm not talking about one missed deadline. I'm talking about the people who choose to go through life with this slightly chaotic selfishness of, oh yeah, I'm not very good at organising myself. So, and they're always having dramas and they're always needing your help to get themselves sorted out, because they don't pay attention. People who don't use calendars, people who sorry, if you can hear that noise, that's Rosie behind me, one of my lovely dogs. She's digging in the bed behind me to make a nest. So if you can hear her, I apologise, but I'm not going to try and stop her, because I know that when she's nest building, there's nothing you can do. Rosie. Right, I'm talking about those people who go through life basically taking from people around them, but in quite a nice way. So they're either like constantly having dramas, and that means that they're offloading their stuff onto other people, missing deadlines or needing help, a lot of help, because that's just the chaos they live in. And they somehow manage to get huge sympathy from everyone around them, and everybody just kind of shrugs their shoulders and go, well, that's just how they are. And this is actually really irritating, because it's actually really selfish, but they're not being called out as being selfish. And that doesn't mean that we have a lack of compassion. It's just a problem if that's how people learn to go through life, always getting dug out of a hole by the hole fillers. And this is a problem, isn't it? if you're in an organisation, and increasingly a lot of people are, where there's constant cuts so that people are now doing 3 people's jobs, there's always going to be holes to fill. And if you don't like doing a bad job, which I know you don't, if you like things to run smoothly and professionally, and you believe in doing a good job, doing things well, not letting people down, I bet you're filling holes for people who aren't doing their job properly, and that they're getting away with it because they choose to live in chaos. They choose to live in the drama of their life. Now, that doesn't mean there's no compassion there, because I've been through really difficult times in my life, and a lot of people have helped me, and I'm really grateful for that. But there are some people who that's how they've learnt to go through life, is by never quite being organised enough to meet a deadline, always needing somebody to do part of their work, never really doing their job. Now, that's how they've learned to get through their life, and you've learned to get through your life in a different way. But I'm not interested in them, because I choose to work with people like you. So there's not much you can do about somebody who chooses at this point in their life to behave in a chaotic way, which gives them an excuse to meet deadlines. There's not much you can do about them, but you can choose not to constantly fill holes or rescue them. And this is so hard. This is so hard, because you can see the consequence of them missing that deadline or doing something badly. You can see that, and you can see the ripple effect. So you want to stop it, because you're a lovely person and you don't want anybody to be let down. You don't want the organisation to fail on some level, to, not meet a client's needs, to not meet that level of service, because you are lovely and you have high standards. But what's it costing you? Because you already have your job. So what's it costing you to hole fill and to rescue the people who choose to live in a different way? Because there's choices here. If you're choosing to overwork, to miss your lunchtime, to stay late, to worry about things, to take on too much so you can't switch off after work, and that's impacting the rest of your life. So overwhelm. To take some of that back, your life back, I invite you to look at that area of selfishness and discover what it brings up for you, because it's costing you in some way. So if somebody else isn't there doing their job properly for whatever reason, and it could be genuine, they could be really ill, they could be could have an ill child or an ill parent. This isn't a judgment about what they're doing. It's just that I choose not to work with them. I'm just looking at you. So that's always going to happen, isn't it? Because humans come in all different shapes, sizes and flavours and ways of being. But let's talk about you. So that's going to happen anyway, and there's nothing you can do. A one-off or a couple of times crisis is different than somebody who you recognise, well, that's just how they are. That's their pattern. That's how they choose to get through. That's working for them. But if rescuing them and hole filling isn't working for you because it's costing you, what can you learn from just noticing that? So you can get angry and get resentful, or you can notice it neutrally. Oh, that's interesting. Some people feel fine about going through life being rescued and not really doing their job properly. Some people are okay with that, but you're not. So how do you prevent that damaging your health, taking over your mind with trying to sort it out? How do you stop yourself overworking in order to make up for other people's ways of dealing with whatever's going on in their life at the moment? So without judgment, with compassion still, how do you do that? And it's really hard. Of course it's hard, because it may involve letting something go, letting a hole remain unfilled, letting a job not be done properly. And that can be really hard. But you can't save everything. You can't save the world at the expense of your life. You can, but it's going to cost you. Because I filled so many holes. Goodness me, I overworked running around rescuing and hole filling, and it's so not worth it. In my opinion, it's not worth it. It wasn't worth it for me. It really, really damaged my health. And I've learnt that one now, but it's hard. So my question is to you, is that happening to you at all? And notice what comes up for you. What does it tell you? Well, for one thing, it should tell you that you're not selfish, and that putting yourself first is an act of self-love, and it is an act of gentle rebellion, which allows you to notice. So at this stage, and at most stages, I'm really inviting you to just up your self-awareness. What impact is other people's selfish behaviour having on you? And you don't have to do anything about it, but not noticing it, I believe, is the danger. Thinking that it's temporary, thinking that you can cope because you're tough. Well, you can cope and you are tough, but I thought you wanted more than pushing yourself to the limit and coping. Didn't you want more than coping? Because if you want more than coping and getting through, which I know you do, then noticing how other people's behaviour impacts you, or actually not how other people's behaviour impacts you, but how your reaction to other people's behaviour, your reaction and judgment of other people's behaviour, whether you're noticing it as selfish or noticing it as not selfish because you're really compassionate and kind and you like helping people, just noticing how it impacts you, and then letting it go and committing to yourself first. So that was my attempt to call out the elephant in the room about selfishness in the most compassionate way I could. And I hope that that's helped. There's real selfishness in the world that we need really good boundaries about, and that involves noticing it and putting ourselves first. And then there's the kind of negligent selfishness, the lack of consideration, the lack of awareness of how our behaviour impacts each other. But if you're hyper aware of how your behaviour may be impacting somebody else, then I invite you to just notice what that's costing you and come back to yourself and use the morning promise. Every morning, 1 minute, embodied practice. I commit to myself first, my life, my way. And I think of this as an adventure, an adventure of gently rebelling against just going, struggling to do what everybody else is doing and survive, and having this adventure of, I'm uncovering what living my way means for me. And that is a pulling the attention away from the external into ourselves, noticing how our bodies feel, and not necessarily doing anything about it, just noticing first. The noticing is, I cannot emphasize enough how important just the neutral noticing is, without the adding to the, I'm really tired, so I need more rest. I'm really stiff, so I need to do more yoga. My mind's overwhelmed, so I should be meditating. No, get away from the adding to your to-do list and just coming back and just notice. It is so powerful. Neutrally noticing is so powerful without having to do anything. So I'd love to know if you're using the morning promise, and I'd love to know what's going on for you. Okay, thank you so much for being here. I will see you next week. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If this resonates with you, please use the like, subscribe and share buttons to help other people find their way here too. And please do go to www.heidimark.co.uk/the 1 minute mark with an E to join my mailing list and receive my free 1 minute life-changing audio practice.